Hello YouTube, Mandibil here. I'm going to comment on an elderly video by Stefan Molyneux and Free Domain from around 2015, and this is sort of a chance to see how he handles people, discussing with people his ideas of ethics. And of course, this can't stand alone as a description of UPB as such. And I encourage you to go through my complete deconstruction, not destruction. Maybe it is a destruction. I might argue that, but a deconstruction of UPB in a series of videos, and you can find a playlist on my site. So I highly encourage you to go if you want to understand whether or not this kind of ethics that Stefan Molyneux proposes works. Then I encourage you to go and listen to my deconstruction series. So and I will through this commentary video here, I will possibly refer to specific things that I've discussed in a deconstruction. So if it doesn't necessarily make sense to you what I'm talking about, it would make more sense if you have seen the deconstruction. So I can't explain everything, for the umpteenth time, right? So let's see how it goes. It's called "Is Morality Subjective? Nihilist versus Philosopher." And again, it's a title, right? But it's a recurring theme in how Stefan Molyneux approaches discussions. In the very early days, it was very much, I like Socratic dialogue, and he was, so as far as I remember, much more open to take long, sort of round table discussions about and where he steps back a bit and is open for suggestions. So it was more like that, at least, right? Now it is like the front lines are the nihilist versus philosopher, right? And to be honest, I don't think that the guy calling in is actually a nihilist, but he sort of implicitly says, well, the nihilist would maybe say this or that, right? Sort of is as a third person to some argument, right? And then Stefan Molyneux grabs that and says he's a nihilist, and I'm going to write that in the title because nihilists are those people that we fight against in his little cult sphere, where people are sitting waiting for somebody to jump on, and it's already this us versus them mentality, right? So from the get-go, you should be warned that, it's my opinion, these kinds of, these are the front lines, and now we are going to fight you. I'm going to, it becomes sophist rather than philosophical, right? And it's in my opinion, sophistry is when money and philosophy mingles, right? Money tends to screw with philosophy. It's always those philosophers who, that's why I trust a guy like Socrates. He apparently never took money for it. He didn't start an academy. He just wandered around in his sandals in Athens, in the Agora, and talked to people. I know that's the fairy tale, right? But if we take that for granted, right? Or somebody like David Hume or Spinoza or some poor people who can't help it, right? But people who are multimillionaires, something like that, trying to argue about philosophy, then they know that certain arguments lead in a certain direction, right? And they're sort of all of a sudden they will start to talk about Donald Trump. Meanwhile, as they are anarchists, right? They will start to talk about Christianity. Meanwhile, they are atheists, right? So all this kind of bullshit, sort of, and this video is from exactly that time when Stefan Molyneux started to loosen his philosophy around politics and Christianity, and at the same time, And I didn't sense that clearly before some time later. I'm often sort of slow to I have to chew on it for a while and see what the hell is going on here. There's something weird here, right? And it may take some time. It might have been in 2016 before I really, or was it? No, it must have been. No, it was in 2016 that Trump was elected. Yes. So it wasn't probably until 2016 that I really got the idea that he was starting to screw with his own principles and ideals, right? And this one, when it comes to philosophy and morality, this was the video that sort of gave me a heads up that something might be wrong here, right? And at the same time, my own philosophy was developing significantly, and I got some insights that sort of turned everything on its head, right? So this is sort of a pivotal point in my own philosophical development, not exactly because of this video, no, and not at all because of this video, but that was sort of happening meanwhile, right? So so I got a sort of a clearer understanding of what kind of person he is and what kind of arguments he uses, and sort of when he's sort of, when you're dealing with narcissists, they tend to be very good at manipulating, or let's say, they are well argued. What's the word I'm looking for? Well spoken. They are, they are just can be charming and so on. But every once in a while, the shit comes to the surface, right? Every once in a while, you will see the true person underneath, right? And it's inevitable. If you have lived with or been close to or any kind of narcissistic personality, you know that this will happen sometime or another, that something really strange, sort of the underlying personality sort of bubbles up or becomes uncontrollable, right? And I would say that was what I detected in this video, is sort of a more true or a side of Stefan Molyneux that you don't see that often, right? Or not as directly as this. And this is a guy asking about his holy grail, like, I found the holy grail of philosophy, UPB, come look, everybody, I'm so fantastic. And then some guy comes up, well, what about this, and what about that, and what about he should be sort of, thank you for calling me, or thank you for asking these questions about my philosophy. If there's some problem in my philosophy, it would be nice that people call in for free to tell me something might be wrong. But that's not exactly the approach he extends in this. So let's head into it.
Preferable behavior, UPB, is a valid concept. However, how does the concept of UPB make ethics objective when your values, ends, and goals that a UPB depends on are subjective?
And that's a absolutely freaking good question. It's such a good question, right? He nails it right there, right? The caller nails it absolutely and utterly right there, right? Because it's exactly the thing he cannot do. He cannot jump from objective to subjective, right? He can't do it. And if you watch my deconstruction series of UPB, he can't do it. He sort of does it with words, and then sort of, scientific method, rationality, and now it's objective, without really, arguing for it, right? And there's another part of it, and that is Hume's is-ought gap, which he violates, even though it's his first ground rule for his self-contained behavior in his book, that you can't get an ought from an is, right? That's a short version of it, right? And then he proceeds a few pages later to just jump over this gap as he sees fit, right? And that is sort of jumping from an objective to a subjective, right? Like you are saying, this is the case, that's an elephant, that's a bicycle, that's a fence, that's a house, and so on, and therefore you must not. Which is sort of you're adding an ought that's sort of from some, without some subject, a person moralizing. There wouldn't be that ought without somebody stating the ought, right? So that ought is subjective. So what the caller is pointing out is really that, but any kind of judgment in that category or in that sense of arguing is subjective. Yes, absolutely. It just nails his UPB like it's nails it to the wall, right? And Stefan Molyneux, deep down inside, knows this is the case. I mean, he must have some idea that, unless he's freaking crazy, right? He must have some idea that there's something missing somewhere, right? Because nobody takes this ethics seriously, except all his acolytes and all his fans and all his sort of, flying monkeys and all these weird people he has around him in his sort of inner circle, right? Okay.
If UPB does not make ethics objective, how does it fit in with your theory? Why does the concept matter?
Well, yeah, I think it's a fairly decently good question. And look what he's like, oh, damn, I need to check my hair. Oh, it's annoying. He looks like he's just pissed that somebody calls about his holy grail. Yeah, maybe it's because you think it's holy and you think it's a grail, right? That it's done. I've done it. I don't need to look at it any further, right? It has been proven. Jesus of philosophy has spoken. Sort of, you idiots, you try to be critical, right? Critical thinking, not a part of my philosophy here on my show, right?
It's from William.
Hey, William. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. Is science objective?
Okay. The first thing he's a counter-attack, sort of, like, is science objective? Right? So now he's pushing back. He's not taking his question seriously. He's pushing him back like this is a fight. I'm a sophist. I have to push them away from me so I can make the lesser argument the better, right? This is utterly sophist in nature, right? He's trying to catch the caller on the wrong leg or confuse him, or you're dragging him around in the circus ring, or until he's so confused, and then he'll say something that sounds weird, and then Stefan Molyneux says, you're such an idiot. Why haven't you read my book, or something along these lines, right?
Oh, yeah, science is pretty objective.
What do you mean pretty objective?
I mean, it's completely objective.
Okay.
Well, science is not objective. Science is not about, it's about objects, but science in itself is a method. It's a principle you follow, right? Nobody says you have to follow it. Fine, do whatever you like. But it's a method, it's not an object, right? You can't see, what color does science have? What taste does science have? What smell does it have? What feel does it have? What sound does it have? It has none of these things. So it's not an object. And by definition, it cannot be objective, right? Unless you have another idea of what objectivity means, right? And then you should be discussing that instead of this mumbo jumbo, right? Science is the method for predicting the future behavior of reality, right? Without referring to anything that you can't experience, but that experience is what we call knowledge. So it's based on knowledge. If it's done correctly, I would say, right? According to the standards of the scientific method, is that you have an idea, you have a hypothesis, and then you say, okay, I make an experiment, and during that experiment, you are getting the knowledge, you are getting objective knowledge in the sense that you are watching the objects that your theory refers to. It has to be, you know, some sort of liquid, and then sort of the falling from the tower, or, you know, whatever it is, right? These are the objects, and that's objectivity, that the objects are the center of the experiment, not your personal opinion. And I would also say that if it needs to be objective, there needs to be at least two persons observing otherwise it could be just be your misunderstood sort of weird psychedelic experience or something, like. So for it to be objective, there has to be two people looking at that experiment at all times, in my opinion. And then they say, okay, my theory is right or wrong. It has to be adjusted like this. And so this is my theory, or my conjecture, or whatever it's called, technically, that says this, and then present it to other people. See, we have made this, you know, whatever objective experience. And then this will, if you drop, you know, this glass of water from this tower here, this will happen, right? I said, okay, you have a nice crystal ball there. That's science is everything sort of but the object, right? The object are the tools you look at, or the observations you make within the science you do, right? But science itself is a method, it's a methodology, right? It's a principle you follow, right? So therefore, science is not objective. It's a complete misunderstanding of the concept, or the idea, I should say, of objectivity.
And but the goals of science are subjective, right? I mean, you can choose to try and figure out the universe by reading tea leaves or praying to your ancestors.
What are you saying? I need to hear that again. Oh.
What do you mean, pretty objective?
I mean, it's completely objective.
Okay. And but the goals of science are subjective, right? I mean, you can choose to try and figure out the universe by reading tea leaves, or.
But then it's not science. If you're reading tea leaves, I mean, reading tea leaves, yeah, if you say it like that, you're just conjuring up some ideas by looking at tea leaves. But that's not science. That's not science. Then you're bringing in your own understanding of what you're trying to see. You're imposing subjective standards for an objective fact, or putting that into the object. That's exactly what science tries to avoid, right? Bringing in gods and whatever, right? So now you're confusing it. So if you can say, I can do science, but I can choose what to do science about, right? That's sort of rationality. I am rational about my science behavior. That I will be scientific about how I will make this potential video, right? So I use my laptop, and the cord is plugged in, and my recording software is set up, and so on, right? That's scientific. The idea is, the principle is, if I do these things, the result will be this video in the end that I prefer to have. So this is it's what I'm getting at. It's like these little jumps he makes every now and again, where he sort of a sleight of hand, right? It's sort of a sleight of hand tactic, where he sort of tricks the listener into, maybe he doesn't know what he's talking about. I wouldn't rule that out, but he jumps from doing subjective stuff and calling it science to saying that there's subjectivity, or what? No, that you can choose not to follow science, but you can pretend that it's science to blue stamp your whatever theory you have, right? So this is a recurring problem, that sort of religion is always imbued with a part of reality and a part of mysticism, right? And it always comes together so that you can't refute it, right? You can't refute it completely, right? So like God is an elderly man with a beard and sitting on a cloud, right? Everything is sort of, yeah, I could, an elderly man talking in a booming voice and sitting, but that when we get to that sitting on a cloud, that's where it gets, that's a bit more than my rationality or my reasoning can take me, right? But then then you say there's no God or something. No, I'm just saying that this sitting on a cloud part, right? So this mix of is a tool to get mysticism or get bullshit through by attaching it to real stuff, let's say, right? And maybe that is what he's trying to get at.
Or praying to your ancestors or anything, right? Mm-hmm. So why is ethics in one category if it's a valid and universal and logical framework, but science is in another?
Well, it deals with...
That is basically Hume's is-or distinction. And you sort of handing it over to the listener so he can, fool around and make some errors you can then attack is sort of a dickish move, right? You should say, as the good philosopher you pretend to be at least, right? You should say, well, the problem is about Hume's is-or distinction, or that distinction that Hume invented or described, 300 or something years ago, something like almost 300 years ago, right? That people use their experience of the real world and then attach moral meaning to it, right? And think that they have created something. They have created something, but it's not well argued, right? It's just, I'll make this up, and therefore it's right because I made it up. Well, that's purely subjective, right? So people going from sort of strictly objective, let's say, or a description of reality, to attaching some ought to objects or people, individuals, or their behaviors, or the way they act, or whatever, some kind of ought somewhere. This ought is generally just pulled out of their ass, to be frank, right? They just attach it like this is what it is. And the problem is Stefan Molyneux does exactly that in his book, right? He does it actually 4 times. 4 times he repeats the same error with rape, murder, assault, and theft, right? He brings in these ideas that are inherently moral or immoral, I should say, and then just accept it as if that's, objective. And that's bullshit. It's not objective. It's a breach of, or an invalid jump of Hume's is-or gap. So, and that is why there's a distinction between science and ethics, because no matter what way you turn it around, you're always in the need of making some individual judgment of a situation with regards to morality. You can't observe morality, right? You can't, and I'm pretty sure that Stefan Molyneux has said this time and time again, you can't observe it. That means you need some subjective judgment of some kind. But when you are in the world or in reality, everything is by default without moral content, because it's a subjective judgment, right? And all you do when you attach judgment to the world is you are taking this sort of objective understanding of the world and adding this subjective understanding. This moralizing, right? And the only point is you just have to point out how you do that. You can't just say, well, people tend to believe that this term is immoral, like, murder, right? Of course it is, because it's defined as immoral, right? It's an immoral kind of killing. So of course it is. But the point is not that it is that, because that's the definition of the word. The point is, nobody is able to objectively in any kind point out how they get from a killing to a murder, right? They just say is, and ought, right? So what's the difference? Nobody has done it, right? Nobody. And Hume pointed out that's all you have to do. You need to point out how you get from that killing to that murder, right? When does it become murder? How do you know?
Preferences, or at least your theory deals with preferences, which is different from, like, if you're going to say somebody should do something, then you have to say that the goal, like you have to ask why should they do something. So in the case of do we want to, let's say, want to figure out why clouds accumulate or whatever, we would say that you should use the scientific methods to figure out that question. And
right. So you want something to be logical and empirical in order for it to be
something to be logical and empirical. That's not so. Your experience is not logical, right? If I experience a tree, is that logical? Is that a logical tree? Is that an empirical tree? Empirical is not the part of the experience. Empiricism is a claim that knowledge can only be gained through that kind of experience, right? So the tree is not empiric. My way of judging whether or not, if I'm an empiricist, whether or not that tree is knowledge, is empiricism. It's a kind of understanding of what knowledge is, or the access to knowledge, or maybe rather it's a way to say that these things over here are not knowledge, which somebody might claim is knowledge, right? That I can think of Santa Claus, or what I could consider Santa Claus, doesn't mean that that's knowledge, right? So I'm a strong proponent of empiricism, absolutely. But the tree is not empiric, right? It's not logic. Logic is something you do in your mind. And yes, there may be standards for what it means when something is empiric, or when some argument or some statement is logic. Fine. That's a good thing that there are systems you can follow, or avoid following also, right? That's these kinds of standardizations. That's what ethics need. That's why there must be a moral principle. There must be one moral principle that people can follow. They need to be compatible in their understanding of that objectivity they are both a part of, right? So, okay, I got a little on a tangent there, I think. Let's hit on.
Objective. But you have to have a preference for something being logical and empirical in order to feel that the objectivity is even a value.
What do you mean something being logical and empirical? I can't say, if I look out my window, I can't judge whether or not I should experience that freaking tree. Either I experience something or I don't experience something, right? From a propositional standpoint. If I say that's an elephant, well, that's false to me, because there is no elephant in my field of view, right? But is it objective? Is it logic? Is it empiric? I mean, that's not in the object, right? So these ideas of science and objectivity and logic and empiricism, it's all these words that sounds like we know what's right, and people claiming something different, they're just stupid or out to manipulate us, or like. And yeah, there are a lot of these people, for sure, absolutely. But this guy is not one of them, right? He's asking good, solid questions that need answering, right?
Right?
Yes.
So how is science different from UPB in that regard?
Well, it's in the way you define moral rules. I have a short argument quoting a couple passages in your book that take your definitions of what morals are and moral rules and what are universal preferences and what are
he really, look at him. He looks like, oh, can I get rid of this guy? I need to get rid of him. I don't like talking about UPB. It's so boring. It's boring. Right? Does this guy look like he's interested in ethics? It's a core question about it's Hume's insert gap. Your fucking first ground rule. Hello, right? He's asking about, and you're trying to mumbo jumbo him with this empiricism and logic, and I'm so scientific, right? If UPB was the scientific method, why the hell did you write UPB, right? Why didn't you write the scientific method is what we need to judge ethics? Why wasn't it that title, right? And say you have and you say this is the scientific method and it has been developed since Francis Bacon in 15 whatever and 16 something probably. And this is the scientific method, and let's run some moral principles through it. But no, that's not what you do, right? You haven't even described the scientific method in your book. You haven't even described it, what's going on in that, right? But you talk about it all the time, and it seems to me it's more like, well, people can argue against the scientific method because there's a whole, there's a academic structure in the world that is so grounded in this scientific method, and for good reasons, of course, that it would feel like you are trying to move around with the moon or something like that to challenge the scientific method. So he brings in the scientific method to blue stamp his ethics, so people can't. Oh, but are you talking against science? Well, you must be crazy. So therefore my ethics must be right. So
universal preferable behavior is, and then proves how through that the whole objective moral rules, the latter half of your book, with the logic and maxims, depends on a subjective goal or subjective value.
I'm already conceding that. Right? I mean, you have to have, if you want to be in philosophy, then you have to have a subjective preference for universal truth, right? Because there's no such thing as an objective preference for universal truth, because that would say that a desire exists outside the subjective realm of the human mind. So if you want to know the truth about the physical world, you have to have a subjective preference for the objective methodology of science, right? Mm. So you
have to have a subjective preference for the object. Yeah. But that's when somebody does science, right? And I read in a book that somebody made this experiment, I am sort of subjectively trusting that what they did was correct, right? I can't know if they made their whole thing or part of it and made it up. That happens now and again, that people make fake science to get famous or whatever. How do I know? I don't know when I read something. I'm trusting, right, that they are following these high standards of science, but I don't know it, right? I don't have knowledge about what this scientific endeavor, sort of the 10,000 miles away from me, was carried out. I have no idea what they did because I wasn't there. I didn't experience it. I didn't have knowledge, right? I don't have knowledge. And claiming that me reading something in a Scientific American about some experiment or whatever is kind of knowledge for me, that's bullshit. It's not knowledge. It's not knowledge because I'm not experiencing it. And that's one of the major criticisms I have about science is, and it's not a criticism of science, it's people's understanding of what knowledge is. The epistemological side of science is that if some scientist has claimed this is the correct, then everybody knows it now. We're just writing this big book of knowledge that people can go in and see, okay, now I have this knowledge. Now you don't have that knowledge. Knowledge is when you experience a thing. If I make a science about an elephant, when I experience that elephant, I have knowledge of that elephant. That's it. That's knowledge. That's objective. That elephant is objective. What I write in a book somewhere is not objective. It's just I'm following a pre-described system of how to handle scientific data, right? And claiming that that is knowledge, that is bullshit, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that neither of these guys are doing that, but I think that is the core problem of understanding what objectivity is. Science is not objective in the sense that results of science are objective facts. They're not. They're descriptions of the world.
If you want to have a valid moral theory, then you have to have a subjective preference for rational consistency, empirical conformity, and so on.
Rational consistency. Okay, it's the same lingo that he uses in the book, that he throws around science and rationality and objectivity and empiricism. Just these words keep, getting slammed on the walls, and people say, "Oh, I'm afraid." He's such a scientific guy, and he has proven that the scientific method can be used for ethics. So I'm just the stupid one, right? He's not really saying anything. He's just throwing words up in the air. He's not connecting it. Be careful to look very precisely of what he's doing, and more importantly, what he's not doing. Just saying science and empiricism and logic doesn't prove anything, right? It doesn't philosophically get to any description of how you should think about these things, right? If I say, I have made a moral principle, and I'm just going to say the word empiricism and scientific method and logical and rational, and it sounds like you know what you're talking about, but you're not connecting the dots, right?
But I'm not sure how it would be different between ethics and science. It's a subjective preference for a universal method.
The difference is Hume's is-ought gap, right? You have violated several times in your book. That's the problem. You constantly jump the Hume's is-ought gap, and you make some clever word manipulation that make it sound like, this you want to eat this cake, and therefore you have a preference, and everybody must, so it must be universal, and they must prefer this, and it's sort of a behavior people are behaving in the world. Universally preferable behavior. And since I defined ethics or my framework as universally preferable behavior, I've proven it. Yes, it just doesn't work. As I very, very thoroughly point out in my deconstruction of UPB in some of my previous videos on my video series regarding this.
If you're going to say that people ought to be good, is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
You say that people ought to not initiate force.
That's not the argument in UPB. I like people to not initiate force is not an argument any more than I like jazz, right? I mean, me having a preference for what people should do is not a philosophical argument, and that...
I would second that, or no, I wouldn't second that. I would beg to differ that. Of everything you think about is philosophy. This thing about sidetracking subjective experience as unphilosophical is fucking bullshit. Because all you have is your subjective experience. He is attempting, without you really noticing it, an authoritarian, because of his faulty metaphysics, which is sort of either materialist or dualist, I'm not really sure. He thinks that he's experiencing a reality out there which is inherently objective and that he has access to. That experience he has is the thing out there, and it is objective and never changing and logic and all these things, empirical, you can go on, right? And then he says, if I experience that elephant and you say it's false, there's something wrong with you, right? You are manipulating me. You are doing this. You're doing that. You are get the fuck out of my way, right? I know there's an elephant and it's objective, so fuck you, right? That's the foundation, and that's where it goes completely astray, because he does not have an experience of that outside. He has an experience inside his own mind, which may represent something outside himself, but that thing outside he does not have access to, because he only has the representation of it in his mind, right? This faulty metaphysics is what destroys the rest of his ethics. It has to go bad because his understanding of, or his stretching his abilities for insights and knowledge beyond his abilities. And that's going to screw with everything, right? So
there's nowhere in UPB where I say it would be, I would prefer it, or it would be nice, or people ought to just not initiate force or whatever. That's not a philosophical argument, right? The argument within UPB, which, you can get at freedomainradio.com/free, but the argument within UPB is that if you want to define a system of ethics or of universally preferable behavior, then
see, they did that. Ethics equals universally preferable behavior. So he can always say, when people start to say ethics, well, then he just says, he sort of says, okay, now I'm going to take charge of the whole idea of ethics and call it what I like it to be called. And it has to be universally preferable behavior. And so all discussions about ethics is always on his terms, right? So he controls the narrative. And it's fucking annoying. I would like to see him discuss ethics without using the words universal or preferable or behavior, right? Or UPB or anything. Just talk about ethics and, talk about metaphysics, talk about epistemology, and talk about ethics without talking about UPB. That would be nice, because that control of the narrative is a sure sign that it's a sophist, right? It's someone who wants to, fence you in to his ideas of, he controls the word, and if words or the arguments or the statements or whatever it is he wants to sort of manipulate you with, right? So he's interested in controlling the debate so it ends in the right camp, right? So he's not pulling himself out of the debate. So he has a subjective interest in the conclusions about his objective ethics, right? It's so fucking bullshit, man. It's ridiculous.
The behavior that you define as universally preferable behavior has to be three things. It has to be universal, it has to be preferable. In other words, people have to be able to choose it, and it has to be behavior, not thoughts, for reasons I go into in the book. So the non-aggression principle can be universalized. You can have everyone in the whole world not initiating force at the same time. You can't have everyone in the whole world initiating force at the same time. That would be impossible.
Why would that be impossible? Can I initiate force on somebody trying to initiate force on me? Can I initiate force on somebody else while somebody else is initiating force on me, or can I initiate force on somebody else, and then another guy or girl initiates force on some third person or fourth person? It must be, right? I mean, what kind of argument is that? I can initiate. I mean, otherwise it becomes a battle of words, right? But then it's not initiation if you don't want it, and but then it's like this. Okay, but that's your subjective opinion, and that's not philosophy, and then you're sort of caught in this time loop where you lose connection to the real world or your everyday experience of what is going on, right? And that sort of takes he cuts all your lines to your subjective daily experience and put you in this sort of UPB balloon where you can't argue against him, right? So
at least as universally preferable behavior. And it is behavior, not thought, because the initiation of force is not, I'm thinking bad thoughts about you, but I'm doing something unpleasant to you with a fork. And
so it's utilitarian. If you're thinking about good or bad behavior, then it's deontology, right? It would be Kantian duty-based, some kind of duty-based sort of 10 commandments or something like that, right? And if it's about some kind of behavior in the world, then you're sort of talking about actions in some way, and then it's utilitarian in some way. So it's a utilitarian kind of. Is it? I'm a bit confused now, to be honest, right? And then again, one thing that I want to point out is he is conflating actions and behavior. He is creating a gray zone between behaviors and actions, where he can talk about actions, but then claim they are behaviors. When he needs to use one, he uses and you have no sense of whether or not he's talking about categories of actions or specific action with specific objects. Because if he's talking about objectivity and science, you have to have a fucking specific object. That's a part of science. Then you can't talk about behaviors because they're a category of actions with no particular object, right?
And so it is universally preferable behavior. You can have the non-aggression principle conforms to the standards of universally preferable behavior.
But what if I don't want the non-aggression principle? What if I made my own principle, right? Why are you singling out this particular moral principle when your system is not a moral principle, but a system to check whether a moral principle is valid, right? So why are you constantly bringing in this particular moral principle that you like? Is it because nobody else has run anything through UPB? Nobody in the world has checked a moral principle using UPB that anybody knows of in Free Domain or Stefan Molyneux or anybody. Nobody in 15 years has used UPB for anything related to moral questions or moral statements or moral principles. Nobody outside Stefan Molyneux. I would like to see that. I would like to see somebody saying, well, I used UPB to check this moral principle and it checks out, so I'm going to use it, right? Nobody has done it. I mean, it's ridiculous. And you talk about NAP, a non-aggression principle, as if that is really what you wanted to prove in the first case, already before you wrote the book, you had the non-aggression principle. It's an old one. It goes back in the 20th century, as far as I believe. Some anarchists in the 20s or 30s, or maybe even before that, right? Maybe even, Bastiat or these guys back then were talking about this. I don't know. I haven't been able to trace any. I haven't done the full research on it. I might do it someday, trying to figure out where the hell this non-aggression principle comes from. I'm not saying that it's a bad principle or anything. I think it's pretty decent, but it doesn't. It's not complete. There are things missing in it. For one thing, what is the definition of violence, right? What is the definition? It's a matter of degree, right? If I touch somebody very gently on the shoulder, is that violence? No, but I don't like people touching me on the shoulder. So where's the proof? Just because your shitty ethical framework checks out an app doesn't mean that it's proven, right? Because how do you make moral principles in the first case? What needs to be established or needs to be settled, or what kind of structure does it need to have to be a moral principle? Maybe you could take something that is ridiculous, but because it's sort of very ridiculous, it could run through UPB without problems. If you have a sieve and you have large grains of sand and smaller grains of sand, only the smaller grains of sand will go through, but it's only those who are larger than the the pore size of the sieve that gets held back, everyone that is smaller will get through, right? And maybe some of the very small ones you don't want because they're so small. So you can't take a sort of a slice in the middle of. You can only take all small particle until this size, right? And in the same way with a moral principle, very, very, very small, stupid principle might actually be able to go through UPB without problem because they're so small, so they can't be detected by UPB, right? So you can have ridiculous small moral principles that checks out with UPB, but is actually immoral in their structure, right? How do you know? You haven't even defined what I mean. It's like saying you need to put gasoline on your car, and then you say, okay, if somebody asks, well, what's gasoline? Well, there's gasoline. Yeah, but what is it? If you never saw or heard of gasoline, what the hell? How would you know if it's gasoline, right? So you have to describe what the hell it is. Okay.
Whereas the initiation of force, the initiation of rape or murder or theft or assault does not conform to universally preferable behavior. So if...
No, but the problem is that you have not pointed out what is immoral about it. It's not an argument to say that murder has always been considered bad and therefore immoral. That's not a proof of morality. That's your job as a philosopher to point out what is immoral. Murder is just a word, right? There has to be, and particularly in a moral system that claims to be equal to the scientific method, there has to be some reference to an object. I mean, it's so fucking ridiculous that people take this shit seriously.
You and I are both in a room, and we have a moral theory which says taking each other's property is morally good. Then I should both want to take your property and have you take my property from me.
Yeah, that happens all the time, doesn't it? Doesn't it? That happens all the time.
And yet, if I want you to take my property from me, then you can't achieve the universal value called stealing, because it's only stealing if I don't want you to take.
But how do I know that you don't want me to steal it? You're conflating the object with an idea of what you want with regards to that object, but the other person doesn't know what that other person. If I'm in the room with another guy, I don't know what he's thinking. I may be judging from his behavior and his he has a knife in his hand and threaten me or something that might point in the direction that he doesn't want me to take his wallet. But I don't know that he doesn't want it. He could be making a movie at the moment for all I care, right? So there's no way for me to get access to whether or not he feels this is stealing or not, right? And the same goes the other way. So whether or not somebody can take my wallet and me not wanting it doesn't influence whether or not that guy or girl is taking my wallet. So yeah, it's right that if I don't want my wallet to be taken, I can't want my wallet to be taken while I don't want my wallet to be taken at the same time. It seems weird, sort of, Gollum, it's a split personality, right? I wouldn't rule out that it's possible to be that, but that would be sort of a sick person, right? But I want to keep my fucking wallet. I don't want to be able to say afterwards, well, I didn't want my wallet to be stolen. No, but then it's too late. Then it's no longer ethics or morality, right? Because my wallet is there in that other guy's hand. I want that to not occur. What do I need to do to make that not occur? Well, that's what you need to figure out. You don't have to say that if somebody steals your wallet and you don't want it, it's stealing. Yes, of course it's stealing, right? It's from my point of view, but it's from my subjective point of view. The other guy can't see if I'm thinking it's stealing or not. No matter how much, movement I make with my arm or threaten him with violence or whatever, he can never get to the point where he see, okay, I can see now that you don't want this, right? You can't get to that. You can't get to somebody's subjective experience. And that's what you're trying to prove your moral system with. But you can't both want to be stolen from and stolen at the same time, right? But nobody can get to that point except from a purely subjective standpoint. And that violates your whole idea of this objective scientific approach to ethics.
Take my property for me. Like if I leave an old stove on the front of my house saying with a sign that says take me, no one's going to convict you for theft if you come along and take it, because I want someone to take that property of mine away.
But if I come past somebody's garden and there's a stove that says with a sign that says take me, how do I know that the stove is from the same person that owns that ground, or that the sign that is put on by somebody who owns that or wants to get rid of it? It could be somebody passing by putting up a sign to infuriate his neighbor and say, take me, while this guy was just waiting for somebody to come and carry his stove to his old mother who needed a new stove, right? Or a used stove. And then just put a sign there to infuriate the neighbor or something. How do I know? I don't know that. All these weird situations you create that sort of prove some kind of objective standard for when something is stealing and not stealing. You can't get to it. It's purely subjective, right? It's absolutely, utterly, and purely subjective, right? You can use it in an argument for some kind of objective morality.
And similarly, if I rent out my lawnmower and then you pay me, then it's not theft and so on, right? So it's not people ought to be good. That's like a kid saying I like candy or puppies are cute. It is that ethics are universally preferable behavior. And if you're going to have an ethical system, then it has to be universalizable. It has to be something that people can choose. In other words, it can't be something outside the realm of human choice, because then philosophy or ethics wouldn't. It's like saying, well, the ultimate diet is Klingon food. Well, Klingon food doesn't exist, and therefore it would not be a very useful diet. And it has to be behavior, not thoughts, for reasons I go into in the book. So that's in a crux, the argument around universally preferable behavior as a system of ethics. And it's got nothing to do with I'd like people to be nice or anything.
So what? I guess then my question shifts to
what the caller is getting at. What mechanism would make people want to use your ethics? And it would be a good idea if Mr. Molyneux would point out that what he is saying, UPB is not a moral principle. He should say to the guy, you need to figure out what moral principle to follow. We can't talk about what to do with regards to morality if you don't point out what principle you're using. So now they are sort of caught between Stefan Molyneux talking about his framework for checking out a moral principle, while the guy is obviously going for, why should I follow a moral principle? So they are sort of like they are on two different sides of the discussion, or two different lines of argument, and there's a big risk that they're going to talk past each other now, I think.
Why is it this kind of seems redundant? Why is it good to be moral, or why should you be moral rather than not?
It's actually a very, very good question. Nobody says you should be. I mean, nobody can. It's like, if you're forcing people to be moral, you are being immoral by forcing morality on people. So why should they follow any kind of moral principle? That's a freaking good question. I mean, it's purely subjective. Why should I follow a moral principle? If I don't want to follow a moral principle, why should I? No, you shouldn't. I would say don't follow it. I mean, I'm not going to judge anybody what they should do, right? What I might be able to do as a moral philosopher is that if I have a perfect moral principle, if I have found a perfect moral principle, I could say that what should happen if you don't follow this moral principle, and let's say people you want to interact with actually do follow this principle, you're probably going to lose out on things that you might be getting at this point, but if you stop following the moral principle, you will not get these goodies, whatever it is, from that point on. Because maybe people would say, well, I'm not going to interact with this guy who clearly do not follow what I consider the perfect moral principle. So I'm going to say, okay, your way of behaving seems to point in the direction that you are about to, at any point in time, rejecting the moral principle and do as you see fit, without care about the consequences for other people from your lack of adherence to the principle. So these people would reject you. And that might mean that you can't get petrol to your car, or you can't get food from the store, or you have to go to another store somewhere down the road that has worse food. So slowly you are limiting your access to other people, interaction with other people, because they will reject you because you don't follow the same principle as they do. Now, if you're the only person in the world following this principle, I can see there's a problem. And that is it has to gain some sort of momentum before it really manifests in the world, right? And that is the big problem. But I think the core is really, in this case, most, if not all, moral philosophers tend to say, this is what you should do. This is how you should act. This is how you should figure out your moral principle. This is what a moral philosopher really should say. This is what I am going to do. I am going to do this. I am going to make my own moral principle. I am going to figure this out myself, and I'm going to follow this principle, right? And when people ask you, why did you do that? Well, I have this moral principle I'm following, and I'm arguing for this way and that way, the other way. And then people say, wow, that's interesting. Or most people probably say, well, what a weirdo, following a moral principle. How dare you, following principles? That's bad. My prime minister says you shouldn't have principles. It's bad. And that's why you should follow a principle, right? So the problem is that most moral philosophers or moralists, they want to tell other people how to live, right? And the crux of it is you shouldn't do anything. There's no particular thing you should do. Otherwise, it wouldn't be philosophy. It wouldn't be ethics if you can't do what you want to do, right? But what the moral principle, if it's applied consistently throughout, or let's say that all people in the world follow it, you should get the consequence you deserve from a specific action, right? You should get the consequence that action deserves, and then you will get the action. Fine, you'll get the consequence, but the human rationality will usually adjust your behavior or your idea of what action you might take if you get the right consequence of your action. So if you can get away with murder by working for the state, you don't care about how many people you murder. But if that would have a consequence on whether or not you could get food or get a job, you will probably stop killing people, right? So the adjustment of the moral principle should have the effect that people get the consequence they deserve from a specific action. And that itself is sort of a invisible hand kind of Adam Smith-like way, adjusts people's behavior into a much more, what people want is exceptions. They want everybody else to follow moral rules, but they want exceptions for themselves, right? They want to have pensions, then they want to have, money from the state, and they want, but everybody else should follow moral principles so that they are sure to get what they want, right? So many people want to find loopholes everywhere so they can get away with stuff that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get away with, right? What about single mothers? Without the state, they wouldn't be single mothers, right? It would be a very rare occurrence because there would be no guns to threaten the father away from the family. So in the first place, women would be very choosy about what kind of men they would have children with. That would lead to better families where families stay together, because if she had to make it on her own after a divorce, because she couldn't get money from the state and you couldn't get, her kids taken care of via the state and so on and so on, she wouldn't be interested in divorcing anybody, right? There probably wouldn't be anything like divorce. So it's getting rid of moral hazards, right? An ethical system, let's call it that, should go towards eliminating moral hazards, or in other words, create a scenario where people get the consequence they deserve from a specific action. That consequence be anything from, getting killed to making millions on a fantastic product, right? Okay.
Moral. Like what?
You're asking me for you're asking me for preferences, but it's around.
Well, isn't it called universally preferable behavior?
The universality.
Like you can say that. Okay, you can say then that morality is objective, and you can define what is right and what is wrong in ethical terms. But then all the nihilist has to say is that it doesn't matter, because you're not really doing anything wrong.
Well, so the nihilist would say that there's no such thing as universally preferable behavior.
Why would the nihilist say that? Why are you framing what some predicted nihilist would say? Yeah, so you're constantly putting this discussion of ethics into UPB, right? You're constantly sort of dragging people into UPB and discussing it. I said that before in the video here. It's kind of annoying that you can't discuss ethics without constantly referring to your terms, universal preferable behavior. There might be some part of ethics that deals with this stuff, but it feels always like you are trying to get the upper hand on the discussion by saying, well, it's universal, and then you can judge people and sort of wave them off by saying this is not universal and this is not, so it's not ethically subjective, right? So you can never get into any constructive debate about UPB because you have locked yourself in this, I'm not even sure what to call it. It's like a sort of a realm of self-serving rhetoric that will always lead to the same result. No, you can't think of ethics without immediately jumping into this idea of U and P and B, and then you're stuck there. You can't think out of it. It's like it's a sort of, I wouldn't say mental disease, but it's like, I'm missing a word here. It's like when you have a certain, it's like, it's dogmatic, maybe. It's something like along those lines, right? It's very annoying.
That's the argument I'm making.
Right, because that's a terrible argument.
Because
that's a completely self-detonating argument that is completely incomprehensible to any rational thinker. Because the moment you say there's no such thing as universally preferable behavior, you're saying...
There it is. If you argue against me, you have proven my argument. So everything stops there. We can't discuss it. Every time somebody comes and wants to discuss ethics with you, you're just saying, well, you can't argue against me, then you prove my stuff, then fuck you, right? It's so annoying. It's not annoying. I don't care. I don't want to discuss ethics with this guy because he's sort of deranged in his own little cage of UPB where he sits there and say everybody comes knocking will prove my thesis, right? It's ridiculous.
It's universally preferable behavior to reject universally preferable behavior. And if that doesn't cause a short circuit, I don't know how to help you.
So look at that. This is smug. Like, I don't care about this. You're so stupid. You don't. I have found the Holy Grail, and if you argue against the Holy Grail, you prove the Holy Grail. So I'm sitting here in my castle. I'm always right. I'm always right. No, every time people come to argue with me, they prove I'm right. It's I mean, megalomaniacal craziness.
Yep. There's no such thing as truth.
There is no such thing as truth. No, truth is not a thing. Can you show it? Can you hold it up so we can see it? Can we see truth? Here it is. This is truth. It's a thing.
Is that a true statement? Yes. Is it absolutely true?
A true statement. That's a proposition. Okay, but it's a statement. Fine. But now you're conflating things being true being a thing and the proposition being true. That's the result or the conclusion of a proposition is not the same thing as a thing. It's not the same as a thing, right? So you don't know what you're talking about.
Yes. Do you not realize the self-contradiction? No. Well, philosophy can't help you after that, right? Because that's someone holding up a piece of cheesecake saying it's broccoli and refusing to take any evidence to the contrary. So no, nihilist doesn't get anywhere. Now, someone can say that they don't want to participate in any philosophical discussion. For sure, they can excuse themselves and say, I'm not going to make any statement true or false.
But how would you enter into a discussion about ethics if your approach is, if you argue about ethics, you are approving my theory? How could you enter into any kind of constructive debate with that approach? I mean, you have to be crazy to support any kind of an idea in that direction. It's ridiculous.
Positive or negative regarding philosophy, ethics, virtue, whatever it is, metaphysics, epistemology. Great. Okay. Then, basically you're trying to influence civilization by going to live in the woods. You're out of the equation and you're not going to be part of it. But the moment you engage in a philosophical discussion, you're saying the truth is preferable to falsehood. The truth is.
Well, why are you saying that? No. Truth is better than falsehood. If you say that's an elephant and I don't experience an elephant, I prefer the term false. I wouldn't call it falsehood, because what about truthhood? Is there something called truthhood? Why is there only something called falsehood? What is that? There's true, there's false. Why do you call it falsehood? Is it people wanting to always say that this proposition is false? Is that falsehood? That no matter what, that's an elephant, that's a tree, that's a car, and they're always saying false, 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 false. Is that what you're... How do you know that they experience that, whatever you are proposing in a proposition? You don't have access to their experience because of the problem of the minds and your fallacious metaphysics, right? If you experience something, it's true for you if you make that proposition. That's an elephant, and you experience elephant, that's true, right? That's it. That's all there is, right? That's all there is.
It's something that is objective. It's outside of human consciousness, and there are particular standards that you ought to conform to.
Ought to conform to? Are you referring to Hume's is-ought gap now, or you ought to do this, you ought to do that? Is that? Are you jumping across the is-ought gap now? You're using the term ought. That could be. You could equivocate the term and use it in other kinds of. And it's always one of these problems with Hume's is-ought that it's not necessarily the term ought that is important, but ought Hume used to describe moral content of argument, right? That they are going from arguments sort of syllogistically from statements without moral content to all of a sudden arrive at statements with moral content, as if there was some kind of natural flow in that. But you ought not. It sounds very much like jumping the is-ought gap.
Or the truth, or fidelity to the truth, which for a nihilist would be there's no such thing as truth, which...
No, now I know it. Maybe I'm fly fucking the terms you're using. There's no such thing, But are you saying truth has no meaning, or a nihilist would say truth does not have meaning, or it's not a valid idea in philosophy? Well, then I would understand. But when you're saying no such thing, a thing is something that can be a fact or objective, right? If a proposition is true, you are establishing the fact of the concept inherent in that proposition. If I say that's an elephant, the fact is elephant. If that proposition is true to me, then it's a fact for me that there's an elephant. That's the fact.
Vaults over the reality that he's making a universal truth claim, that there's no such thing as universal truth claims. So no, the nihilist is just taking a long dump in the punch and thinking he's adding something to the party. Oh,
Hello?
are you still there?
I'm sorry. I actually muted myself.
I thought you just taken me up on the invitation to go live with the...
No,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry about that. When I talk about nihilist, I'm not talking about the metaphysical nihilist or the epistemological nihilist, something like that. I'm talking about the ethical nihilist, simply that, like, you can accept that truth exists and reality exists without saying that morality exists. Now, when I say that universally preferable...
That's actually a good point. That you could be a nihilist in the sense of, isn't that what nihilism is? Isn't that really what nihilism? They don't reject truth as an idea or as a method or whatever you want to call it, a propositional method. Nihilist would say that you can't point. The nihilist is the guy would say, but you can't jump the is-ought gap. There is no way to get. That's nihilism, isn't it? That you say you can only describe the world, you can never get to any moral judgment, and there's no other way around, right? That's one of these things that I might also have been a little fluffy about, is that the Hume's is-ought gap has become sort of the gold standard for checking moral rules, right? Or let's just put it that way. And so it's of such a big focus that people tend to say, well, if I have to talk about ethics, I have to find some bridge across this gap. But who says that you actually need to jump this gap? Maybe there's a shortcut somewhere else. Maybe there's some other way to do this ethic thing, instead of saying is, and therefore ought, in some way or another, with some gap filled out with a bridge here that nobody seems to have been able to find yet. But what if there's a sort of another road? If you're looking down this chasm and say, well, I have to build the bridge over here, but if you look down there, maybe there was a natural sort of a formation that you could cross the gap. It's just another philosophical route that Hume doesn't say that either, right? He doesn't say that you could find some other way to go around and to get to ethics or get to moral judgment. He just points out, if you're standing there at that chasm and saying, I'm just going to jump over here, and there's a 200 meters, right? You can't do that. You have to build that bridge. You can't just jump over, sort of metaphorically, right? You have to build that bridge if you want to get from that point to that point, right? But he doesn't say that you could go further down the chasm and then maybe take a short jump or make another kind of, whatever it is, walk through the river, or metaphorically seen, right? So there might be, if there's no alternative to the Isord gap, then there's no way around it. You have to find the bridge to get past, right? The nihilist would say you can't build a bridge, and there is no other way to get around this chasm, right? And you say there is a chasm between is and ought, and the nihilist would say you can't get past it. There's no way around it, right? It's infinite in that direction and infinite in that direction. There is no alternative path across the chasm, and you can't build a bridge. I would say that would be so. Nihilism is really sort of an understanding of there's a sharp delineation between reality and subjective experience. So these two things can't work together. It's either the subjective experience or reality, right? I mean, you can have access to both, but you can combine them. I would say that's what nihilist is. I want to point out, I'm not nihilist, but before somebody just labels me that way. So I think that nihilism is, I'm not too much into nihilism, but I would think that that's what nihilism really is. It's the rejection of a connection between objectivity and subjectivity.
Behaviors don't exist. I don't mean that. I'm not talking about universally preferable as means to an end. As in, if I want to build a house in the woods, it is universally preferable for me to cut down the trees to create an area for the house. But
but we're not talking actions. We're talking theories.
Okay,
that's a big problem, because what people are performing in the reality is actions. Every time you do something, it's an action. It's always an action. It's never a theory. I'm not theorying now, right? A theory is something you do particularly only in your mind. So whenever you do something, it's an action. If you never acted in any way, it would be hard to say that you were immoral, but I wouldn't rule it out, right? It would depend maybe on something, right? But if you never acted in any way, at any point in time in that behavior, nobody would be able to say that lack of action is immoral, right? You couldn't do that. I mean, that would be ridiculous, right? I think, but it would always have to be some reference to some action, some movement, or something you do with your body, right? And that might count, language and speaking and yelling and farting and whatever. So this is also one of the big problems I have with the UPB, is that behavior thing, and he constantly refers to actions, sort of in this gray area where he jumps between actions and behaviors, and it becomes behaviors when he needs to, right?
We're not talking specific actions. We're saying if I claim that my theory is universal, then it needs to be universal. If I claim that my theory is rational, then it needs to be rational. These are almost tautological, but not quite. So go ahead.
If I make the claim that it is, or the theory that it is universally preferable to cut down trees versus not cut down trees to build a house in the woods.
No, you can't. Because universally is not specific to a particular location. It's not particular to a particular action.
I'm saying
like cutting down trees.
I'm saying, but murder.
But that's the big problem then. Then you have just said that your ethics doesn't work. Because if I'm standing here and I want to cut down that tree, I want to know whether or not it's moral or not. That's what I want to know. That's what I need. I don't need your fucking universal theories, right? I want to know if I can cut down that tree and how I settle that, right? How do I know if that freaking tree out there, I can grab my axe and go and take it down? That's what I want to know. Or any other or should that dog there, can I eat that? Or, you know, whatever. These are the things in the real world that people deal with every day. They don't want some, you know, high-flying universal bullshit, right?
Murder is an action. If you can say that murder is not universally preferable, then that's a contradiction.
There is nothing contradictory between cutting down trees and not cutting down trees. But if I say that murder is universally preferable behavior, then people both want to kill.
But you haven't. There it is again. Then he smuggles morality in through the back door by taking murder. Murder is not an object, right? You can't say, oh, there's a murder flying there. That's a murder. No, they're an object that is possibly killing another object or ending their life. But that is not murder, right? When you're pointing to that, then you're saying that object is close to that object, and that object now seems to stop living. But when did it become murder? What is murder about it? You could call it killing. So, yeah, killing, ending a life. A life has ended. That's objective, right? If you start to say murder, now you are bringing in subjectivity, right? You're saying that is murder. How did you get there, right? Because I'm saying is, and Stefan Molyneux is saying is, ought. How did he get to that ought? He doesn't give a shit because he don't even understand that's what he's doing, apparently, right?
Kill others and want to be killed themselves.
But
if you want to be killed, then it's euthanasia, not murder, which for some people is a similar category, but it's not completely identical philosophically. So it comes down to that which is inflicted upon other people. Now, you obviously inflict your acts upon a tree, but a tree is not a moral agent in the same way that a human being is. But if you inflict your acts upon a human being, then you have two of the same entities, two human beings. If you say that murder is morally good, or murder is wonderful, or murder is universal.
But I don't want to have a knife in my chest and saying, I don't want to be murdered. I'm right because I don't want to be murdered. I don't want the knife in my chest, right? When you're describing something as murder, ethics is done. Morality is done. We are on the other side. Something that shouldn't have happened, right? Then you're saying this is on the wrong side of ethics. Ethics didn't work. And then you're using that as a foundation for defining ethics, right? You can't do that. You're violating, basic ideas of what we're talking about. You should be pointing out that which is happening there should stop. Otherwise, we will end up in murder, right? That would at least be closer to what you're doing. But I would even say that, but a third party standing looking at somebody else, why is that? Why would I, looking at somebody else doing something, why would my idea of what is going on there be more prevalent than their respective idea of what is going on? They might be working on, The Exorcist 2 or something, and killing each other with something that looked like weapon, and then I'm going to shoot the other guy because I want to save that one, and then I just shot an actor who's in a movie. Whatever, I'm making things up, but I'm not trying to find a little loophole and then say, and then there's no ethics, right? I'm not an edgelord, okay? I want to point out that you can't know that which you claim to know. You can't know that it's murder, right? And even those who are participating in that act you want to label as potential murder or murder, they don't know either. They don't know what the other guy is thinking. They only know what they themselves are thinking, right? So nobody knows if it's murder or not, right? You are appealing to an authority. You are implicitly appealing to an authority who walks around and saying, that's murder, stop that, or I'll kill you, right? You may not think that that's what you're doing, but that is actually what you're doing, right?
Preferable behavior. Then you have two human beings with opposing categories. One person who has the willingness and capacity and moral ability, if not the right, to take another person's life, but that other person does not have the same right in return. Murder cannot be valued by both people who are trying to kill each other at the same time. In the same way that if I want someone to have sex with me, then it's not rape, sort of by definition, right? So rape can't be universally preferable because then...
So how do I know that that other person wants to have sex? How do they know? It's a good question. It's a perfect question. It's a foundational question in ethics. How do you know? Because they say so. There are numerous, tales of men having sex with women, and then the day after, a normal, what would most people would call a normal, engagement in sex, turns out that the woman, I'm looking for a word. Claims that the man has raped her or behaved in some, sort of Me Too, toxic, whatever, right? And then sort of, but you said you wanted, and then where's the, where is the knowledge of, how do you know, right? It's a freaking good question. The point is you don't know what other people are thinking. That's exactly that's where it stands or it falls, this ethics, right? You don't know what other people are thinking, right? You only know what you yourself is thinking at any moment, right? You only have access to your own thoughts. Even if other people claim I'm thinking this, I'm thinking that, and I'm thinking the other, you don't know if that's what they're thinking, right? It could be pure bullshit, right? To lure you into some situation that you then afterwards can't get out of. That's the fucking problem with ethics. You do not know what other people are thinking. And you can't just jump the Izzard gap just like that, right? Because you don't know what other people are thinking. You can't know if that knife going into, you are the third party looking at one guy sticking a knife into another guy, if that's murder or not. You can't say that. It could just be a killing or ending of they could have agreed that, yes, you need to kill me, I want to commit suicide, but I don't have the balls, could you stick a knife in me, right? What business is it in any way, what business is it of yours what other people do with their lives? Don't stick your nose in other people's lives. Stay away from them. What is also very problematic about ethics is these sort of moralizing people who want to go around telling other people what to do. It's sort of the whole mentality of the state is people who made a living out of telling other people what to do. These stupid parasitic bastards, right? Keep to yourself. Leave other people alone. Their lives are none of your business, right? And that's what the approach I think ethicists should do. Okay, I'm going to write something about, I'm creating a moral system, I'm trying to get at a moral principle, and I'm going to say, this is what I am going to do, right? Because you're the one having your experience, right? You're the one having the objectivity. You're the center of your moral behavior. You're not the center of somebody else's moral behavior or behavior in general, right? Because you don't have access to their thinking or their experience, but you do have access to your own. So any moral principle must start with the one creating it, adhering to it, right? If you're an ethicist, you are basically writing to yourself or arguing to yourself what you want to do and how you want to act in the world, right? So that's another problem with UPB, because he doesn't create a moral principle. He just says, there's this old NAP and it seems to check out with my UPB and therefore I can use it. But it was already there. I mean, so he hasn't done anything new, right? He's just saying, well, all the old shit works, right?
And it means everyone should want to impose sexual violations on other people who want those sexual violations imposed upon them. But the moment the victim wants the sexual violation imposed upon him, he's maybe role-playing, he's maybe got hot whack.
How does anybody else than that victim know what that victim person wants? How do they know? They don't know that, right? Not just in a sort of an observation fashion, right? You can't just say that this person wants this and this person does not want this, and you can't do that. You can do it, but you're wrong, because you haven't. It's something you haven't gotten access to. So you're just sort of, from your own subjective standard, applying moral labels to people as you see fit, and that is fucking problematic.
Stripping down in uncomfortable places, but it's not rape anymore. So these are self-detonating categories that don't exist when you take an axe to a tree, because a tree is not a moral agent by which you are universalizing
we are
the act of hitting someone with an
about
axe.
12 minutes
understand
into
the
I'm going to
contradiction,
take a break now. We have reached the 1.5 hour mark here, and I will save more for a part 2. So see you then.